there are so many colleges and universities out there, literally thousands in the United States, and it can feel like there is just one place where your student will be successful. I like to think about success in this process as having a happy, successful, launched kid who's going to college.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Office Hours, where we explore the key trends shaping higher education and what these trends mean for students and families. Today, I talked to Coalition for College CEO Liz Cheron. We discussed a variety of topics, including how to stay organized during the admissions process, how to weigh the advice of other parents versus admissions professionals, and also how to keep an open mind as you craft your college list. So without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Hey everyone, I'm Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships 360, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Liz Cheron. Liz is the CEO for the Coalition for College and the former Dean of Admissions at Northeastern University. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks for having me, Will. I'm glad to be here today.
So one of the things that we always like to kick off conversations with is about myths and misconceptions and admissions and financial aid. Liz, I know you have really extensive admissions experience and have a great purview on like the process given your role at the coalition. So I'm curious what your take is on the biggest misconception that students and parents have about college admissions.
Absolutely. It's a great question. I think certainly it's one that many students and parents can get tripped up by. And I think there's a couple of different things that come to mind. One is around the cost of college and affordability that we see a lot in the news media. Stories that talk about how expensive higher education is. And this is not to minimize that it is a significant investment for families, both in terms of time and effort, but also financially. And it is an investment that you see significant return on investment for your child, or for you as a student if you're contributing towards the cost of education. So I think that it can be really confusing to see news stories talking about the sticker price of college, that costs are rising. And what that story fails to highlight for students and families is all of the resources and aid, whether it be merit-based scholarships or need-based financial aid that's available to students and families to defray the cost of attendance and make it that much more affordable. I think it's easy for students to say, well, college isn't for me. I can't pay that much money. My family can't pay that much money. So that college individually or college writ large isn't something that's in my future. And I think it's critically important. And so much of the work that we do at the Coalition is about helping students and families understand affordable options, understand resources that are available to be able to research affordable colleges, to be able to really do their homework and find that fit. I think the other piece that I see that can be really filled with misinformation for families is just too much focus on strategy in this process, that you have to sort of know all of the tips and tricks and ins and outs to be successful. And I just don't believe that that's the case. I think that it's a process that can easily get overhyped, and that there, of course, can be a lot of anxiety associated with, and that it's really important as folks in this field who have the expertise and the information to be able to freely and widely provide good quality information that helps to ground students and families. So this process doesn't feel overwhelming, and it doesn't feel like you need some mysterious strategic playbook in order to be successful.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely on the first front, that's one of the big things that we're always, combating is just this idea that college is, so unaffordable. When you look at the data, and it shows that, like, maybe for a small percent of really high earners, the cost has like gone up over the past like decade or so, but for everyone else, the cost is going down. That's a little
Exactly.
like yeah, frustration of mine when I see sometimes these headlines about like, $100,000 a year degrees, which, technically that's true, but, for students who need financial aid, oftentimes those are the schools that are, those students with families earning under, X, are going for, their full cost of attendance, aid package or full tuition
Mhm.
scholarship. So
I think another place that we see a lot of anxiety from students and parents, and this again comes from the stories that they see in the headlines or they hear out in the world, is anxiety also about how to finance education. That families can go in with an assumption that things like federal educational loans and loans in general are a bad option, because they do see news stories about individual students that have taken out typically a large amount of private loans to be able to finance the cost of attendance. That can be a really challenging choice. I think that it's another area where helping students and families to understand all of the different ways that families can reasonably and affordably be able to pay for college is really so critically important, so that they don't count themselves out of really reasonable resources and tools that are available.
yeah, that's really interesting. I've heard anecdotally from a number of counselors that that's kind of been a challenge, just guiding students through like the final parts of the process where families like don't want to like kind of go in this expectation they do not want to take out any loans at all, which I get the sentiment of that. And I think to your point, there's these like, examples, and a lot of them are even like graduate professional programs that are really expensive, of students taking out, six figures of student loans. But for most students, the amount like may be like more modest, and to your point, like may be worth it. Just in
Correct.
terms of the degree that you're going to receive and your earning potential. Um, I'm kind of curious, where do you think this, I know like some of the like big news stories can influence, opinions and some of this, misinformation. What are some of the other common sources of misinformation? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think that parents and families who have been through the process before, maybe with an older child, or their children have completed the college search process, while very well intentioned in sharing about their experience and their knowledge, it is an example based on one student or maybe a couple of students. It isn't looking more broadly at the factors surrounding that student search, the broader context, that particular year, all of these different pieces. And so I think it's easy to get caught up, whether it's, at a school event or in town over coffee or talking to fellow parents, that they can be a reassuring resource and that they've been through the process before. Um, but I think stopping at that sort of point of reassurance of recognizing that it's a fellow parent who's navigated, that, unfortunately, they have limited experience in the breadth of different circumstances of students who are approaching this process. And so I think that it can be misleading to say, well, that student didn't get into this school that I'm thinking about. That means I won't get in. Or, I think we hear within high school communities, well, no student has ever gotten into fill in the blank, or no students this year got into fill in the blank. And we associate that with being, not just a fact, but a trend that should then inform that individual student search. And what that's missing is we don't know the students that were applying. We don't know when they applied. We don't know if they applied to particular programs. We don't know so many different factors. So I think that can be another common source of misinformation. So, leaning on your parent community for support, but looking to the experts in admissions and financial aid, which are the professionals doing this work, and the school counselors supporting you in this work, rather than looking to fellow parents whose scope and experience is going to be more limited.
Yeah, I think such a great point to head on. I think yeah, the high school community aspect of that was very very interesting to me when I was a school counselor at a independent school in New Haven, Connecticut, where of course Yale is, and there were a large relatively large number of students who attended Yale, and there's this perception that go attending the school gave you some sort of in. And the truth was that, it was many students whose, parents were on faculty, and that was like more of like the, perhaps the edge or whatever you want to call it that a
Hmm.
student had in the process. But it wasn't the sort of like overarching, just like halo over every applicant from the school. And I think, yeah, that definitely got kind of muddied. I think sometimes, but was something that we tried to be like really, honest about as counselors. And so I
Hmm.
love that point, just, trusting the professionals. And I think the school counselor will also have a really good sense of your high school's like, the context of applicants over the past number of years. They'll have just a really a really good number of data points, and not just like a one of one or like two like data
Yeah.
points like someone else might. Very anecdotal.
Exactly.
um yeah, how are some of the ways that, so I get definitely talking to admissions officers, your school counselor. How are some other ways that students and parents can combat this? And I guess I'm thinking about like students who maybe they're attending schools where there may be, a little bit less, counseling capacity. Maybe they're in a more rural place, or there might not be, college access infrastructure where
Hmm.
they live.
Absolutely. So that honestly is the work that brought me to the coalition and makes me so excited about what I get to do day in and day out, which is taking the expertise of the 150 plus colleges and universities that are members of the coalition, who are all committed to access, affordability, and student success, and taking their knowledge and expertise and translating it for students and families into free programs, articles, content on social media, events, workshops, where they can get that expert informed information for free and in really accessible ways. Because I feel so strongly that this process, again, it's meant to be navigated by a 17-year-old. It's not designed to be some strategic game where you need, the cheat codes or whatever it is to be able to be successful. And so being able to share that information with students, families, and counselors really broadly, and knowing that it's coming from professionals that are working in the field right now, I think is so critically important. And so, two resources that I would certainly point students and families to that are really accessible and particularly interactive are all of the different virtual events that we offer throughout the year. Typically, those are panels with college admissions and financial aid representatives where you can ask questions live of folks and be able to get that expert informed information. The other really cool thing that the coalition's been able to do over the last year is partner with another organization, Schoolhouse.world, which is a sister organization of Khan Academy founded by Sal Khan. And what we've been able to create are a series of college admissions workshops, which are peer-led tutoring opportunities for students to get support in completing their college application, writing their college essay, beginning their college search if they're a little bit earlier in their journey, and understanding the financial aid process. And both those events and those workshops are offered virtually for free for students and families to be able to take advantage of. One of the other things that I think is underutilized in the college search process on the financial aid side are net price calculators and tools like the MyinTuition calculator as well. And those are tools that are available on college websites. The net price calculator is required to be on college websites if they're receiving any form of federal aid, so it is widely available. And it does involve having a little bit of your family's financial information handy, but being able to use that gives you not necessarily perfect and precise information, but more informed information and context about the cost at that institution that your family might see on a financial aid package or ultimately on a tuition bill. So leveraging those resources as well, I think can be so helpful. And events and programming that are put on by colleges as well, because they are creating those programs, certainly to make you excited about their school, but also to share their perspective and information and really being able to tap into that.
Yeah, there are a lot of really great recommendations there. We'll definitely drop that in the show notes, and love the bringing panels to students. I think that's like, especially with current practitioners, just the process is continuing to evolve, and I think like that's just such a key thing to get perspective and insights from people who are doing this like day in day out and have like a very
Mhm.
current pulse. Yeah, we did have on the show Dr. Levine, who did
Mhm.
MyinTuition. So we're really excited about that episode, and love that tool and the net price calculator. And yeah, one of our like big recommended action steps for parents. So if you're a senior out there, or parent of a senior, that's something, and you're concerned about paying for college, that's something you should be doing for every school that you're interested in. To your point, it does take a little bit of work, but I think is a really, really high ROI activity. And some of the net price calculators will even give you merit scholarship estimates, which I think is really nice for families who are thinking about merit, and trying to identify schools where maybe that might be an important part of the process. Obviously it's not a guarantee, but I think the schools that are incorporating that into their
Mhm.
calculators, it's very strong probability as long as your academic progress continues.
Mhm. Well, and I do think, to your earlier question about misperceptions, that can also be another piece that families don't realize early on is that if they're thinking about merit scholarships, which can be a very viable way for students and families to think about affordability, that most typically a student is going to be most competitive for merit scholarships at institutions where they're sort of fitting in as like a good fit in profile, or where they are really a high flyer within that institution's applicant pool. I think that that can be a common misperception, is not realizing that the school that academically may feel like a reach or a stretch, that that's not the most likely place that a student is going to receive a merit scholarship. And so if merit scholarships are part of a family's plan for financing, recognizing that that also needs to play a role in shaping that student's list of schools they're going to apply to, because you're most likely to receive a merit scholarship where the institution sees that you are particularly competitive in their applicant pool. So you hit on another one of those tips to be able to realize.
Yeah, and I guess to piggyback off of that, some of those schools may also have like earlier priority deadlines for
Mhm.
scholarships. That can be quite a bit earlier, in the fall, like even November, December. And it's just, yeah, another things for folks to pay attention to, just because that can make obviously a big difference if that's part of their process. And it sounds it also just I think hits on this idea of just earlier conversations between students and families about cost, about affordability, about expectations there, which I know can be kind of uncomfortable, but I think are just like so critical. If you're a senior right now, parent of a senior, having those conversations now rather than in like
Mhm.
April when you have all the sort of chips have fallen, you have all your acceptances, but there's not really like a ton more you can do.
Yeah, those were some of the hardest conversations that I had as a dean of admissions, were conversations with parents in March and April of senior year whose child had been offered admission, and they maybe hadn't done as much research around affordability at that institution to understand what their aid might look like. And even though I was fortunate to be at an institution that was meeting full demonstrated need for families, so our aid packages were robust, but in some cases, families were faced with a situation of wanting to be able to give their child this opportunity that they collectively as a family dreamed about. And it didn't feel like an affordable fit based on how they were planning to pay for college. And having that conversation in March or April of senior year, when the deposit deadline is weeks away, is so difficult. Whereas it's still hard conversation. Talking to your kids about money is not easy, and having that conversation early on, by fall of senior year, if not earlier, really allows you to have an open dialogue so that everyone has shared expectations. So you can do some more research around the cost of college at the places that your student's applying to. It ultimately, I think, plays out so much better, so that it's not this really difficult situation at the end of senior year when there's so many other things to be considered and so many emotions running high.
Yeah, I'll never forget when I served on a merit appeals committee. Just some of those really tough conversations where at that point also the student had been admitted, they'd done the overnight, and like there's not really much that we can do like on the back end of the process. So totally agree, and I think that doing a net price calculator or MyIntuition, like that can be like a great way to kick off that conversation and really again, I think it can be a little bit uncomfortable just for students, just because like you're sort of feels like you might be prying into your family's financial situation, but
Mhm.
like that is a factor that colleges are considering and is a necessary step of the process. So I think that can be a great way to just have a conversation, like do a net price calculator for a couple of schools on your list and like see how the results like feel and have a conversation about that. Um,
Absolutely.
I think, Liz, one of it's also interesting thinking about these, a family who, maybe they're very much their heart was set on a particular, or the student, their heart was set on a school. Family wants to make that happen. I think it gets at this idea sometimes admissions that there is, and I think it's kind of a funny day for doing this conversation because Jeff Selingo's book Dream School just came out. But students think there is just a singular dream school, and that is success in the process. Just yeah, kind of curious your take on that and maybe how students and families can reframe this.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk to students and parents, and really I think it's especially parents in this context sometimes, you know, I like to think about success in this process as having a happy, successful, launched kid who's going to college. If that's your definition of success, if college is the destination, I think it really opens up the doors for a number of different outcomes, many of which can be really positive and supportive. That there are so many colleges and universities out there, literally thousands in the United States, and it can feel like there is just one place where your student will be successful. And, I think what excites me about admissions still, the reason that when I'm, traveling someplace new, I'll drive through a college campus, or if I'm visiting, I like taking a campus tour, is because it's so cool to see all of these different institutions and fall in love with them for different reasons and see where they could be exciting. In my own personal college journey, now this is, speaking as just my own personal experience, I didn't go to my first choice school. I didn't go to my second or third choice school. I didn't go to my fourth choice school. I was firmly in the middle of my list at a school that didn't have a lot of characteristics that I thought that I wanted. And wow, I was so surprised that some of my favorite experiences from college were things that were not criteria in my college search. So we think there's a lot of this that is about supporting a student to be excited about their outcomes. That a great situation in this process is finding yourself as a student or with your student as a parent come March and April with multiple places that a student can be excited to attend. Having choices feels really good in this process. And so in crafting a college list and thinking about where a student will apply, thinking about being excited, hopefully about all of the schools on that list, that's a really great way to set yourself up for success in the process, because there might be some things that are different between those schools. You might be excited about a major at one and the location at another. But if you can find something to be excited about across that list, then you're going to have a really great experience in the winter and spring when then you're looking at multiple places where you could picture yourself, and really sort of leaning into that idea of bloom where you're planted and where can you set yourself up for success. I think where I would see families struggling is if there was just one North Star, and there was only one place that they were excited about. I think you can get caught up come springtime in spending a lot of time mourning the loss of that opportunity if it isn't offered to you, rather than being excited about the options that you do have. So my other piece of advice was, once decisions are coming out come springtime, focusing on the options you have and the offers of admission that are in front of you, rather than spinning your wheels thinking about institutions where you didn't get the news that you were hoping for, I think can lead to a much more fruitful process, and a much more happy outcome. Because where a student attends school, attends college, that's not their grade as a person. It's not a reflection of their future success. It's not your grade as a parent. Rather, it is hopefully, a place that the student is excited about, and realizing that the admissions process is not a reflection on your self-worth. It's a reflection on how that student fit into that applicant pool that year. It's a reflection on the applicant pool, rather than a reflection on the student.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point, and I know it can be challenging for students and families just because it feels so intensely personal, and you're sharing, essays that are heartfelt and something really personal that personal statement that you want to share. Your grades, your involvement, you feel like you are being judged. But to your point, there's just that's the unfortunately the process is about like institutional priorities and whatever happens to be important for the college, which that's something that can change from year to year.
Mhm.
um I'm curious for if I'm a student or parent of a student right now, and like maybe I do have my heart set on a particular school, but I hear your advice and I want to sort of like broaden this out. I'm open to okay, I want to explore like other options. Do you have any advice for students who might be looking to like expand or build on their college list if they have they have a school or maybe some like a bundle of things that are really important to them?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I might suggest is focusing on which criteria are really firmly set in stone. You can't change and they will stay the same at the institution you select. So things like location, that's a pretty big one that if you think you want to be in an urban area or a rural area, keeping criteria like that I think can be helpful in many circumstances, and not getting too caught up on really specific academic majors or quality of academic majors, because I think so much of the college experience is about taking advantage of the resources that are available to you. You can ask great questions about how you support students in researching their major or selecting a major. You can ask great questions about how a student gets connected to internships or research to be able to explore that area of interest further. But the reality is, the vast majority of students will change their major over the course of college, and there are many different adjacent fields of study that a student might explore. So focusing on the criteria that are maybe a little bit more firm, not giving too much weight to the criteria where there's maybe a little bit more flexibility. And then I think the other really important thing is to recognize that while there's a limited number of colleges and universities that you've heard of, and even me as a professional who does this work and has for decades, there's still colleges and universities that I'm learning about. So the other, really important takeaway I think is just because you haven't heard of a school doesn't mean automatically that it's not good or that you might not be a good fit there. Recognizing and approaching this with um, an eye towards curiosity, like be curious to learn more. What could this opportunity offer me and what might that be like? I think can be so, so helpful going in with that positive attitude opens more doors than just thinking about the colleges, universities that you've heard of because they are those, real name brands, or you've seen them on a sports game, or you know it because it's close by to your home. Recognizing that there's lots of really cool institutions out there, and asking questions about how they can support you and how they support their students in being able to achieve their goals.
Yeah, and I love just kind of this common thread of just approaching it with curiosity. There's so much I think that students are they might change their minds on. Priorities can shift, but kind of focusing on curiosity and those core things that they know are really important to them. Yeah, I always think it's always interesting. Yeah, the kind of follow. I enjoy that about the school counseling side, follows students through the process and see how things change. And
Mhm.
to your about the sort of idea of like a one singular dream school, also saw plenty of students who went to that first choice school and like that wound up not being, the absolute best fit. And I think in some cases, they were just so kind of the tunnel vision of being focused in on this one school that they, didn't necessarily like think about like, the why, and think about the process and think about this as a
Yeah.
launching pad for themselves.
I think the other thing I would add too is that one of the steps in the process that think students frequently skip over or don't give enough time and weight to is the reflection that starts this process, ideally, is thinking about the environments where you've been successful or thrived before, thinking about the experiences maybe you haven't had yet that you want to have exposure to, thinking about you as a person and what can help you to be successful. I think that initial reflection and self-awareness can be so, so helpful so that it can balance out some of the outside factors that you're also hearing of these are the schools that my friends are thinking about, or these are the schools that have been popular in my high school. One of the coolest experiences, honestly, is when I get the chance to work with new high schools that have never had a senior class before, talking
Mm.
to those college counselors who go in with a blank slate. There's so, so much wide open room in terms of students being able to consider different options because there isn't that culture already ingrained around how that school operates. I would encourage students to sort of approach again with that same curiosity and being self-aware of themselves and where they might be successful, but also recognizing that there are so many different options out there and being excited about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that's great advice, and yeah, very very cool to think about counseling programs that are just starting from scratch, where there's not necessarily this sort of this process that is like being implemented each year, and also the student and parent culture is not so
Mhm.
ingrained. That must be very very cool to see that in action. Um, so as we begin to wrap up, I'm curious what it's September as we're talking, almost middle of September. What advice do you have for families that they might be able to act on in the very next week? And I guess to be more specific, families of high school seniors who are just kicking off their process.
Absolutely. So, actions that I would take in the very next week on my to-do list would be to have an open, honest conversation about college and paying for college. And really, both sharing about your family's financial plans for college and hearing your student talk about how they're feeling about the process. I think that can be really critical. Another tip that I hear frequently from admissions deans who have had students go through the process and college counselors who have had students themselves go through the process is identifying one time during the week that you're going to talk about college and not letting it permeate every single conversation over the course of the week, because I think that can really add to the anxiety around this process and tension between students and parents. I often remind students, and maybe this is my go-to for them in the next week, is that you are a senior, and that is so exciting and cool in its own right. And if you're thinking about college and you're already this motivated and this excited, then in all likelihood, college will be in your future in a year. So don't wish away senior year. Find those things to be excited about. Be excited about your high school traditions. Be excited about the things that you've only been able to do during senior year and stay in that moment, because I think that it's so powerful. And maybe my last tip would be to find a way to be organized, that there are a lot of dates and deadlines. There are different requirements and materials at different schools, whether that's doing it on paper or doing it digitally. And again, thinking about it as a family, what do you want your student to own and what do you need to have some insights to be able to support? Figuring out what organizational system is going to work for you, I think, is another great thing to take action on this week.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I particularly love the not wishing away senior year. I think it's just a great reminder for everyone. Just any point in life, there's probably like wonderful things that are like very specific to this year, this month, this moment. And just not wishing time away. And just, I think
Absolutely.
senior years are particularly fun, exciting time, full of possibilities. Well, this has been really great, Liz. Where can people, like online social media, best find you and the Coalition for College?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for more information about the Coalition for College, definitely check out coalitionforcollege.org. From there, you can see all of our events, our social media content. You can check out our articles and link over to our friends at Schoolhouse to check out those college admissions workshops. So, that's a great place to start.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for a great conversation. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Will. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.